20 years a teacher and having recently launched her own platform called Rethinking Dyslexia, where she dedicates much of her time working with neurodivergent individuals, helping them to thrive through education and life. I'm delighted to welcome Sasha Dugdale to Thriving in Our 40s. Welcome, Sasha.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, it is so lovely because we've been friends for many years now, and we've never ever sat down and had an in-depth conversation about the work that you're doing and the impact that you're having without being interrupted, whether by husbands or children or anything else. So, first of all, it's so lovely to have you to myself. And also, I'm really excited about this conversation because as a parent of a neurodivergent child, I I'm learning every day more about their needs and their differences and their strengths and just their wonderful character, that it amazes me that there's not more conversations like this going on. So I'm really excited about what we can share for people who are either dyslexic or people who care for people that are dyslexic. And I think it's also really important to add that it's not just about children that we're going to be talking about. Neurodiversity has no age barriers, and so it's going to be very relevant for children, young people, adults. Everyone hopefully will come away having listened to us and think that they can really thrive with dyslexia and really make the most of the opportunities that they've got going forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, we're going to start with the first question, which is, what is dyslexia and how many people are impacted by it?
So, dyslexia is a specific learning difficulty that primarily affects your reading and your writing. That difficulty is because a series of difficulties with your processing. So, by that, I mean the way in which you receive language. There is a weakness there, and that then has a significant impact on your ability to acquire reading and spelling, particularly in line with your overall ability. Um, in terms of how many people are affected, it's 1 in 10 people in our population. Globally, it's estimated that that's 780 million people who are affected, and they may not be diagnosed or identified with dyslexia.
That is huge figures, isn't it? Yet I feel, and we'll go on to this in more detail when we talk about the education system, but I feel that it's not out there enough. I still don't feel that dyslexic people are being included enough within mainstream education. Do you feel that that's the same?
I think that because of the nature of dyslexia and because it's principally you see the evidence of it in your reading and your writing. So, firstly, a lot of dyslexics are brilliant at compensating for those strategies and masking. And so a teacher may not realize what the source of those difficulties are. They may just say, oh, that person struggles with their spelling. And also, I think the difficulty is that it presents differently in every individual. And the complexity is that often it co-occurs with another difficulty. So it depends. It may be that you're presenting more with ADHD tendencies or dyspraxia, or it's coming up more in your behavior, or you may be highly intelligent, and so your compensatory strategies are able to again mask. But then you reach a point in your education or in the workplace where you reach your threshold, and somehow actually all those strategies fall apart. And so as a result of that, it is often not identified. And there is a real problem with the training that's provided for educators. And like we said earlier, around the wider understanding and conversations around this for people to recognize and understand.
There's so much I want to go back on that, but I think first of all, you mentioned it was about reading, writing, spelling, but and then maybe this is drawing just more on personal experiences with my own child. Dyslexia, to talk about that area in particular, it impacts day-to-day lifestyle as well. And so can we go on and talk about maybe if you haven't been diagnosed, what are the signs that you should be looking for outside of reading, writing, and spelling?
Yeah, absolutely. So the key thing, and Made by Dyslexia have some brilliant visuals that you can look at that really summarize this. So often an individual with dyslexia will have what we call a spiky profile or an uneven profile. So clear strengths in some regards, but then other aspects of their profile lagging behind. So, for example, somebody who may be really articulate, use fantastic vocabulary, and yet actually their phonics are really weak. Or it may be somebody who's brilliant at maths, but they're really struggling with learning a language. So it's looking for that spiky profile, or even just things like processing instructions. So going back to what you said about outside of reading and writing, it's your organization, it's your processing of instructions, it's your short-term and working memory. It is the sort of unevenness to your profile that is out of kilter with your kind of underlying ability. And it's looking for that. And also, as well, sometimes seeing whether there are other difficulties that are going on.
And so if people can identify or they can see that within a child, for example, what are the next steps to getting that diagnosed?
So I think the first thing is to talk to the school, the workplace, about where those barriers are and what those blocks are. It's critical that that individual has some interventions, because it may be that that environment is not fully supporting them, and actually with the correct intervention those difficulties change. Because it may just be that that child or that individual is taking time to adjust to their workplace or their new school environment or the expectations, and so you must put interventions. Then, if the problems persist post those interventions, then you go to what we often talk about second tier kind of support. So, looking at whether that person needs some specialist support, whether we need to change how they are recording their work, how they're receiving information. And then ultimately, you may want to go down the route of a formal diagnosis. The British Dyslexia Association is brilliant. It's got a helpline that you can call for advice around that. Most assessors as well, people, I often sort of recommend that people, if they get in touch with me, that we have a conversation first to actually see, is the formal diagnosis the way you want to go forward? What's that going to give you? Has your child already had lots of intervention? Have there already been assessments by the local authority or by a specialist advisor? Is this going to enable and support? So, sorry.
No, I was going to say it seems that there's lots of different steps that you've got to take. Should there be little actions or tools that either the dyslexic person can start to do themselves and the carers around them, or have you got to really persevere in trying to get that help in the first place?
There are definitely steps you can always put in place at home without that formal diagnosis. I think one has to act from the position that most supportive strategies for individuals with dyslexia is good practice. So actually what you may be doing for your child will benefit another sibling. So for example, getting the sand tray out and getting them to write their spelling using magnetic sand or using magnetic letters or some shaving foam will be fun for everyone, like, including the adults. So
Yeah.
so I think if you kind of take a step back from that, actually, it's about using inclusive strategies and also things that are quite low input that you can readily put in place. A lot of good practice is about reinforcing the learning, over learning, to build up that automaticity. So things like seeing that learning in lots of different contexts, cooking and looking at a recipe and then getting them to do a quick bit of number bonds to support them with their numeracy, if that's an area that's difficult and they really struggle with that with their working memory. So it's about, and making those personal connections. But critically, it's about identifying their strengths that you mentioned earlier and leaning into those.
Yeah. It's exam season, and well, as we're speaking, and we touched on it briefly before we started recording, kind of the anxiety around it. And I think as parents, we can be very anxious generally about how our children do within the assessments. Um, but it's trying to take a step back, isn't it? And giving those that find academic subjects challenging yes, you can support them so far, but it's also kind of giving them confidence that what they're doing is to the best of their ability, and not to lay on that external pressure, whether that external pressure is coming from other peers. I've been getting messages from, well, my daughter uses my phone, and I get the messages from her friends, and they've been saying they've been doing 4 hours a day, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, we're not doing 4 hours a day. And my daughter, to be fair, is keeping very calm about it. And the learning strategies that we are doing, you mentioned using sand and magnetic letters. She's incredibly visual, and we've gone down the clay route, and that is not going to suit many of her people in her class, but for her it's like a light bulb moment, Sasha. It was so wonderful to sit down with her and to see her engaged, and to actually kind of learn what was going on in front of her, without her just looking at a page and being like, I don't understand, or getting distracted, or getting frustrated as well. So it's very personal, isn't it? And I think you have to take that attitude right across when it comes to exams, but also within the classroom environment, but also when you're at home as well. It's like one size isn't going to fit all.
No, and also at one time. So the clay will work now,
Yeah.
and then actually you may need to adjust. So that agility from everyone in the
Okay.
home to actually trial 3 interventions, see if that works. If that doesn't work, then rejig it. And just there is so much good practice being shared on the internet and being championed by things like Made by Dyslexia, by the British Dyslexia Association. Jamie Oliver's got his documentary coming out on Monday. Chris Packham's just done a documentary with the Inside Our Minds. So really engaging with those conversations that are championing people's successes. And I think making that child really explicitly aware of their successes and nurturing that. So nurturing their visual, looking at the story that they've just drawn, or them telling you the story and you scribing it for them, and then you reading it back to them and you say, you wrote that. That was your
Yeah.
story.
Yeah.
That was fantastic. And empowering them with that.
It's so important. And I definitely want to come back to that. Before we do so, though, I just want to talk about adults with dyslexia. And if someone is in their midlife and they haven't maybe been formally diagnosed, or they now haven't got that education support system around them, what advice do you give someone who is older about better understanding dyslexia and how their brain works?
So I think the first thing to say to an adult who's belatedly diagnosed is, well done. Well, all these amazing compensatory strategies. You are so strong and
Yeah.
determined and resilient.
Yeah.
So give yourself a big pat on the back and be kind to yourself. So that's the first thing. I think secondly, it's often a relief, but it also can be quite frightening. And so it's sort of suddenly reframing your understanding of why have you had these struggles throughout your life without understanding the source of that. And that can be scary, but also really empowering. So I think it's sort of dovetailing actually the way that you've personally approached that throughout your life, but then
Mhm.
being equipped with that diagnosis. I think there is so many communities of good practice out there that you can use. So really using that and remembering that there are so many people who credit dyslexia for their success because you are thinking differently. But I think also now with the advent of AI and technology, that is just assisting people so much that we can use it in a really interactive way
Mhm.
to support us, to take away the load of the things that we struggle with and using it to enable. So it's a real conduit.
That's it. You're absolutely right. Use what tools are at our fingertips, and but then also, like you say, use that creativity that dyslexic people have. And I wish I had the creativity of looking at my daughter, some of the ideas that she comes up with, and like you say, it's having that confidence to run with those ideas. Can we talk about your work, Sasha, and rethinking dyslexia? What was the why did you set up the platform?
I set up the platform. It's always been an interest of mine. My sister is dyslexic. I have lots of family and friends. My son is dyslexic. I have been an English teacher. As an English teacher, you're often at the front line of seeing these difficulties. And I wanted to make more of a difference. I also felt as a parent that when I felt that my son was presenting with this uneven profile. He was talking about the underworld and Hades, age 3, and yet he couldn't remember his name. Not name, sorry. He could remember his name, but he couldn't remember his age and his colours, and was really struggling to acquire his reading skills. And I didn't know where to turn to. And you turn to the school, but sometimes actually they seem to be getting by, and schools say, oh, they're
Yeah,
just young, it's nothing to worry
yeah,
about. But you feel, your maternal gut instinct is, there's
yeah.
something not right here. I'm seeing a child with a jagged profile. And so rethinking dyslexia is aiming to provide that community support for people, expert advice, and to help people overcome those barriers and championing their strengths and successes.
I think it having come from such a personal experience, Sasha, you, like you said, you come at it from a parent and a loved one, knowing how people can find things so challenging, but then to go on and build something like you built, and to have such an impact on people's lives, I think it's phenomenal. I really do. And at the end, I want you to share all the information about how people can get in touch with you, because I highly recommend that they reach out. Um, I want to ask about, we talked about support within the workplace and support at school. And I put some questions out to some friends just to kind of see whether anyone else had anything they wanted to ask. And one of the most popular ones that came back was about how people can support neurodivergent friends, particularly if the friend isn't talking about it themselves. So they're not saying necessarily they're having any challenges, but from a spectator's point of view, you know that they are struggling. So what advice would you give to people looking in, who is a friend and wants to support their neurodivergent friend as much as possible?
So self-esteem is key.
Okay.
So that 5-to-1 rule, 5 compliments for every one piece of constructive criticism to support. I
Okay.
think thinking about their environment. So I think it can be quite difficult for working mothers with dyslexia. You're managing a lot of things. There's a lot of apps now that you have to do. And as we talked about earlier, dyslexia, because of it being a processing difficulty, can impact your organizational skills and your working memory. So looking at that home environment or the workplace and thinking about how can this work environment be adapted to support this individual, not fix them, support them, so that
Hmm.
they are able to use their strengths to circumnavigate areas of difficulty. So you can often make lots of small changes, like a lot of people put their clock 10 minutes earlier to help them with their timekeeping, stripping back language, actually thinking about, again, when you're a working parent or a busy family, there's a lot of language that's going on. And actually, are people processing this? So can you actually just strip it back? What's the core task that we need to do right now? I think it's really
And
important.
And I think patience. I think, and I'm saying that definitely from a personal perspective as well, but I'm just kind of thinking about it as well from more of a peer level. Having patience with your friends and being like they maybe need longer to process something or to understand. And so just being a bit more lenient maybe with them in general.
And showing that compassion and that kindness,
Yeah.
but also thinking about what can you do to take away that cognitive overload. So are there things that you can take away from them to support? Silly things like, I don't know, the shopping list. Could they tell you the shopping list and you quickly write it down?
Hmm.
Can you
Yeah.
share notes, to-do lists that you need to do? Can you, just trying to think of other things you can do, thinking about technology in the home that we can do, making things visual, like you said,
Yeah.
as reminders, post-its. The power of a post-it is really helpful.
Yeah, it's
Um,
true.
and
Exactly.
and just looking at what can we take away to support, and how important are some of these things. I think we're very hard on ourselves, but actually, how important is that thank you letter? Do you really need to do that, or could you just do a voice note?
Yeah.
Being kind to yourself, and thinking as an adult, do you need some of these things? Do you need to do that? What can you do to help? Can you use speech to text recognition software again, to help with emails.
That there are so many tools out there to use, aren't there? Outside of learning, Sasha, when it comes to resilience and confidence, because I can only imagine that, if you are having this daily struggle with dyslexia and, it's impacting, like we said, kind of education, work, and lifestyle, what impact is that going to have on people's confidence and resilience? And if there is an impact, how can we rectify that?
So I think the impact is where somebody has not been understood, and they've only
Okay.
understood themselves from the perspective of their struggles and not from the perspective of what they are good at and their strengths, that,
Okay.
will be in bucket loads. So I think the problem with dyslexia is it can be invisible. It's not necessarily visible through your behavior. I mean, it can be, but often, again, people are good at masking. So it's misunderstood. You feel misunderstood, and you get you get a sense of your academic ability. You give yourself that label, and you can't move away from that. And then that has a long-term impact on your self-esteem, your motivation, and your engagement. In terms of how we can compensate for that and resolve that problem, I think nurturing their strengths, which I keep on mentioning, there
Yeah.
are dyslexia coaches that are available. There are specialist dyslexia workplace coaches to support, to look at how the environment can be adapted. You also can do, I'm a big believer in nutrition, so using nutrition to support. So things like I've been using Lucinda Miller's book Brain Brilliance at the moment. As a family, we take a lot of omega-3s. My husband's very passionate about ahi flour supplements. Fish, zinc,
Yeah.
nuts. If you go into our larder, I've got big jars of nuts in the car snacks and nuts to again support. Magnesium flakes, there is kind of qualitative research to suggest that really helps with kind of alleviating those stress levels. Can often be
Okay.
when somebody's been really cognitively overloaded and having to work harder to process the information of the day, they can take time to wind down. That can then cause difficulties with sleep. So a bath with magnesium flakes in support. Sorry, it's the dogs.
Don't worry.
So things like that. And again, I guess that comes back to your environment. How
Mhm.
supportive is that environment to optimize, to support, to nurture, to champion?
It's so funny because I'd never thought about nutrition in the same sphere as dyslexia, and in terms of helping, like you say, through brain health. And you're feeding your brain, aren't you? And you need to make sure that you're giving it the right nutrients to thrive in the best way as possible. And similarly, like you say, you've got to be able to have that downtime at the end of the day so that you can process everything that has been going on. And actually, I just did a podcast recently with a woman about stress, and one of the big things we talk about is our end of day routine, and how with children we give them a bath. Well, you don't have to, but people do a bath, they do a bedtime story, and everything is very calm and relaxed. But the older we get, the more we kind of, that goes out of the window. You just kind of, you rush, brush your teeth, and you're into bed. So actually it's going back to that time when things needed to slow down, one, so that you can get better quality sleep, but like you've just alluded to, you can process everything that's been going on in the day. I think that's fabulous.
I'm a big believer in carrying on reading to children for as long as you
Okay.
can, because again, as you say, there is often a lot of early intervention support when they're little, be that bath time or reading them the picture book. But as they get older, that support does move away, and particularly the support around literacy moves away, and actually the focus becomes more on your study skills. But what if actually your reading skills are still weak? You're moving around from school, from chemistry to physics to biology to DT, and actually no one realizes that you're struggling to read the signs to move you around the school. What's going on there? So I'm a big believer in reading to your children, and often using that as a point both to support them with their literacy, but also as a way to with downtime and relaxing them. But it can often be a springboard for conversations about how the day's gone, and quite a safe space for them to
Yeah.
explain how things are feeling. Because for teenagers, they don't want to feel different. And the difficulty with any specific learning difficulty is you do feel different, and
Mm.
that's really hard.
So when you say read to your children, can we just dissect that a little bit? So you are the one reading to them. Are they following the text, or can they be lying there with their eyes closed or looking off into the distance? What do you mean by reading to the children?
So it can have so many different formats. It can be in the
Okay.
car that you're all listening to an audible story through Spotify. It
Okay.
could be that they're reading and you're reading alongside them in bed. And you're modeling that to them. The Barrington Stoke books are brilliant because the Barrington Stoke books are age appropriate titles. They're printed in dyslexic friendly font and on paper that is dyslexic friendly. And they're not.
What do you mean by dyslexic friendly paper? Sorry.
So, cream coloured paper is supposed to support individuals with dyslexia better because there's less of a glare of the font
Okay.
on the paper. And I'd need to double check, but I think the font is slightly enlarged as well. And so
Okay.
they are just more reader friendly for anybody. Again, you know, anyone in the family can read those titles, but also the titles aren't condescending. So a teenager can read an age appropriate story and not feel that it's all been dumbed down. And as you say, them having their eyes closed, or you reading and doing echo reading and them reading a bit to you.
What's echo reading? Sorry.
So echo reading is where you would read a bit and they listen to you reading and then they would then read it back to you the same bit. That can really support with your reading skills and supporting, particularly with younger children. And often as an adult, you can kind of scan ahead to find the lines that you know they'll be able to read. So then it's a real win. Everyone's not feeling too tasked and demanded. And then they've felt successful around words and writing.
I think one of the biggest challenges my daughter has is reading. She doesn't enjoy it, and I think she doesn't enjoy it because she finds it so difficult. And we've tried various techniques, and also just Sasha, with life being so busy, bedtime's getting later and later, and reading gets pushed under the carpet. And so knowing that, like you say, you can listen to an audio book, I think just having those stories running in their head, that creative imagination, and knowing that they're not going to be tested or pressurized on it. And I think because she sees it as homework. And if I say to her, going to go and read, she'd be like, oh, I don't want to read. And she sees it as homework. So it's changing that narrative that actually it's a really friendly, gentle, inclusive thing that we can be doing together without any form of test going on at the end of it.
Mm-hmm. And
So
short stories can really help. And again, or reading song lyrics. I've got people in actually they don't really like reading, but they just love music. So reading Adele's song lyrics or Dua Lipa's
yeah,
song lyrics, that's also fine,
yeah.
I think. And short stories are have a real place. So there's some
Okay.
amazing short stories out there because again, it's not as daunting for children.
We talked a lot about strengths and the superpowers that dyslexic people have, and I really want to talk about it now because I want this episode to be about celebrating neurodiversity. And you've alluded to it already, but using your title, rethinking dyslexia as a difference and definitely not a deficit. You mentioned Jamie Oliver. There's other well-known people in the public eye. There's Whoopi Goldberg. There's Richard Branson's. They've all obviously gone on to achieve phenomenal things, but they've also been very open about the challenges that they've had. Can we talk about the strengths that you've alluded to? What are the strengths that dyslexic people experience that people like me wish that we had also?
Yeah, I think it's the thinking differently that actually that is going to be critical for the digital age that we live in. AI can do that memory. You having a weak working memory, that's not a problem anymore because Google can do that. So actually thinking differently is going to enable position you in the workplace as the creative thinker, as the solution maker, as somebody who sees the wider picture, who's often got really great communication skills, who's got humility, because from a young age, they have had to cope with difficulties. And because they've had to cope, they have learned an amazing toolkit that means that they have such amazing kind of introspection and reflection, and can connect with people, and often a real sense of humour as well. So, for example, GCHQ actively recruit for dyslexics because they feel
Really?
that that individuals with dyslexia are better at spotting patterns between various items or things that seem
Amazing.
seemingly disconnected. That's obviously helping them in the world of the espionage. So, that just goes to show, if you think how hard it would be to get a job as a spy, that actually you've got an advantage there. So it's about
Absolutely.
thriving with that ability to think differently that is going to enable and assist. And Kate Griggs from Made by Dyslexia talks a lot about this. She's got brilliant TED Talks, her website, looking at actually what that offers.
That is amazing. There are workplaces out there who are actively seeking neurodivergent individuals because of, like you just list, that huge list of strengths that they all have. That, like you say, outside of that, we have got Google, we have got AI. So to know that you can bring something completely unique and special, and with that humor as well, to a different environment, there is so much opportunity out there, and that's what we should be praising. I think that's what we should be celebrating. And I still feel that, that there's a slight negativity around the term, and people get labeled, but that needs to be dispersed.
And I think it's about using the label for understanding of that individual's profile, but then looking at that
Okay.
individual beyond that label.
Yeah,
And
that
the
makes complete
benefit
sense.
of an assessment is that it does give a really detailed summary of that person's profile, which
Hmm.
you generally aren't going to be aware of if you are neurotypical and never assessed. So then that allows you to identify, wow, this person's got amazing memory if we strip words back, or this person's got brilliant vocabulary, but actually look, they're not using any of that vocabulary in their writing because they're frightened to use that vocabulary.
Yeah,
So why don't I just write down those words and give them as a word bank on their desk, and then they can then crack on with writing their story?
absolutely, absolutely. You mentioned a lot of resources, and you sent some over to me earlier. I'm going to put everything down in the show notes. Um, you've shared so much information, and it's so lovely to listen to you because you're so passionate about it and so enthused that there is so much out there. There's so much help out there. There's so much support out there, but there's also so much opportunity out there. And although you've shared all this information, if there was to be one message that someone with dyslexia could take away with them today that can really help them thrive going forward, what would that be?
Look beyond your struggles. Dyslexia is not about what you find difficult. Yes, clearly there are some areas of difficulty, but dyslexia is about thinking differently. And with the right mindset and support, you can thrive. And actually, you have got this advantage that you are equipped to be creative, to think differently, to see connections, and that is going to enable you to be championed, to be successful in the workplace. And don't ever let anyone forget that. You know, have those strengths as the cornerstone of who you are, and champion that, and make sure everyone around you is nurturing that. And when you don't feel that there's that support, just look more broadly. There are amazing communities there that want to help, and keep those conversations going, and see your dyslexia as a way to reframe the lens around what strengths are and what they look like.
Sasha, it has been such a joy speaking to you, and everything that you said resource wise, like I say, I'm going to put it in the show notes. But importantly, where can people find out about you and the work that you do? And I also want you to mention about your Mount Everest challenge as well that you just completed, but yet people can still donate to.
So people can find me on rethinkingdyslexia.co.uk, and please do reach out. They can also find me on Instagram, on Facebook. I'm not brilliant on Facebook, but people message me. I always want to help and to share. I think it's really important. I think the greater the exchange of information and celebration, the more we'll shift attitudes and conversations. In terms of my recent fundraiser, the British Dyslexia Association have had a brilliant national fundraiser that's still ongoing, where they have invited people to walk the equivalent or climb the equivalent of Mount Everest. You can do it in steps, so you can cartwheel it, you can row it, you can run it, you can walk it, because they want as many people to join this fundraiser. And the aim of the fundraiser is to raise money for resources and advice and support for those individuals studying for national exams, because it is at times a gargantuan effort to get to that summit, and it can be difficult. There's no doubt about it. But with the right support, you can reach that summit, and you just feel so proud of yourself when you get to the top.
You've got some brilliant pictures on your Instagram about you being at the top. Did you do any cartwheels? Did you do anything other than
Did
walk?
not do any cartwheels. I should have got my daughter to do a cartwheel. She came on the last summit. That is not one of my strengths. Didn't.
Oh, bless. Well, thank you again so much for today. It's been such a joy speaking to you, and it's been such an empowering and motivational conversation. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me.